On this edition of Early Look, I'm going to be previewing the UFC Qatar main event November 22nd between Arman Tsarukyan and Dan Hooker. My name is James Lynch. If you've never watched the show before, I'm going to go through a bunch of different stats and intangibles. Then I'm going to give you my prediction for this fight at the end. Let me know in the comments after you're done watching this video what your prediction is for this fight. Would love to hear from you. And like we usually do, let's do a quick tale of the tape between these two. 29 years old here for Arman, 35 for Dan Hooker, 5'7" to 6 feet tall, 72.5 to 75. So Dan Hooker going to be bigger, but he's also 6 years older than Arman Tsarukyan. And let's start first with Arman Tsarukyan as we dig a little bit deeper into his career. Should mention this is a main event, so it's 5 rounds in the lightweight division. Arman, I mentioned there, 29 years old, 5'7" with a 72.5 inch reach, so he'll be 6 years younger. He's also currently ranked number 2 in the lightweight division. He's got fight of the night 2 times. He's got performance of the night 3 times. He never had an amateur debut, went straight to the pros in September of 2015, did not make his UFC debut until April of 2019. That was the debut on short notice against Islam Makhachev, which he lost. He's had a 9-2 UFC record. He has 3 stoppage victories. Some notable wins in his UFC career include Joel Alvarez, Damir Ismagulov, who was ranked at the time, and Charles Oliveira. In his last fight, we also got to throw in Beneil Dariush, who was ranked at the time too. Some notable losses include the fight against Islam Makhachev in his UFC debut, and then Mateusz Gamrot. Those are the only 2 losses he's had in the UFC. Arman's had a couple close fights in his career. We can go back to the Gamrot fight way back in June of 2022. If you go look on MMADecisions.com, that's the site where the media can submit their scorecards. You will see on that site that 15 media members scored the fight for Arman, just 7 scored it for Gamrot. So that could have been a win there for Arman in his career. And then there was the fight against Charles Oliveira, which ended up as a split decision, which was actually his last fight. That was back in April of 2024. The media member scorecards for that one, that was at UFC 300. The 21 media members scored the fight for Arman, 8 scored it for Charles Oliveira. So again, the majority did feel like Arman won that fight. Arman's had a few layoffs in his career. If we go back and look at the fight that he had against Olivier Aubin-Mercier, that was back in 2019, fought Davy Ramos. There was a 357-day layoff, but this layoff is the longest of his MMA career. Going from Charles Oliveira to Dan Hooker, there will be a 588-day layoff going into this fight. So really long time that Arman's been out. He has had some grappling matches, had the grappling match at Karate Combat, two fights on Karate Combat in May, and then the grappling match back in September. So he has trained since then. He has competed, but as far as MMA goes, he's going to have a 588-day layoff. So that's very long there. Let's look at Arman's stats going into this fight. Significant strikes landed per minute, 3.79. His striking accuracy is only at 48%, a little bit on the lower side. Also, his striking defense only 53%, so he does get hit a little bit. Remember, Joaquim Silva in their fight did hit him pretty good, dropped him in that fight. His takedown average is 3.25. His takedown accuracy is only 37%, which you'd think would be a bit higher. His takedown defense is at 75%, although I doubt Dan Hooker is going to be taking this to the ground, and his submission average is 0.0. That's everything you need to know about Arman Tsarukyan. Very happy to see him back in action after everything that happened at UFC 311, which we should quickly mention. Supposedly had a back injury against Islam Makhachev. There's some rumblings. Was it a weight cut issue? I mean, there's a lot of, Dana White claims there was a back injury. He could have competed. Arman has said there was a back injury. I've heard a lot of different things, but either way, he was not able to fight Islam. Islam ends up fighting Renato Moicano. That's why there's been such a long MMA layoff for Arman, as he was supposed to fight Islam in their rematch back in January. So that clears that up. Okay, let's get to Dan Hooker, his opponent. Dan Hooker also a bit of a layoff coming into this one. So you can see the record there for Dan Hooker, 24-12. He's got 11 knockouts, 7 submissions, and 6 decisions. He's currently ranked number 7 in the lightweight division. He's 35 years old, 6 feet tall with a 75.5 inch reach. So of a 3-inch height and 3-inch reach advantage, but I did mention they're going to be a little bit older. Trains out of Signy Kickboxing. He's got performance of the night 3 times. He's got fight of the night 3 times, and he made his never had an amateur debut, went straight to the pros way back in March of 2009. Actually, yeah, because this doesn't make sense, because it says he has an amateur bout in March 21st, and then he made his pro debut in March 7th. So sometimes Tapology gets that stuff mixed up, but nonetheless, we can just say that he made his pro debut back in March of 2009, did not make his UFC debut, which by the way was at, was that lightweight or featherweight? Yeah, that was featherweight. June of 2014 was when he made his UFC debut. So been in the UFC for quite some time, fought it between featherweight and welterweight. Dan Hooker is featherweight and lightweight. That's what I meant to say. Dan Hooker is 14-8 in the UFC. He's got 9 stoppage victories. Some notable wins in Dan Hooker's career include Gilbert Burns, Ali Quinta, Paul Felder, Jalen Turner, and Mateusz Gamrot. Some notable losses include Yair Rodriguez, Jason Knight, Edson Barbosa, Dustin Poirier, Michael Chandler, Islam Makhachev, and Arnold Allen as well. Again, that's between lightweight and featherweight. He's had a bunch of layoffs in his career. Let's go through some of them. And of course, he's been in the UFC longer, so this is more likely to happen here. Going from Claudio Puelles to Jalen Turner, there was a 238-day layoff. Going from Jalen Turner to Mateusz Gamrot, there was a 406-day layoff. And then going from Gamrot to Arman, there was a 462-day layoff leading into this fight. So that is the longest layoff Dan Hooker's had in his career going into this matchup. So one thing to kind of consider when you're looking at the layoffs for both guys going into this fight. Dan Hooker's had a couple close fights. Let's go back to the Paul Felder fight a couple years back, more than a couple years back. That fight was back in February of 2020. If you look at the scorecards for that one, 4 medium members scored the fight for Hooker, 1 scored it a draw, and 12 scored it for Felder. So Felder probably should have got the nod in that fight. Then there was a fight against Gamrot, which ended up being a split decision. 8 medium members scored the fight for Hooker, 9 scored it for Gamrot. So again, could have gone either way in that one. But Dan Hooker does end up, a lot of people, I guess the majority felt like Gamrot should have got the win just slightly. 9-8 was the total votes. Jalen Turner, if you look at the win there, majority of media did score that fight for Dan Hooker as well. Let's look at Dan Hooker's stats a little bit, shall we? Dan Hooker, significant strikes landed per minute, much higher, 5.03. His striking accuracy is at 48%, which I think is similar to Arman's. Arman's was also 48. So that's kind of interesting. Significant strikes landed per minute, 4.72. His striking defense is at 51%, so he does get hit a lot. Takedown average is 0.73. His takedown accuracy is at 34%. His takedown defense is at 78, and his sub average is 0.3, which is higher than Arman's. And if we go look at the betting odds right now, you can see that Arman is almost a 4-1 favorite. In fact, some books do have him as a 4-1 favorite coming in there. Dan Hooker about a plus 300, plus 265 underdog on that. If you look on Tapology, which doesn't cost you anything, you can go vote there whenever you want. 87% of people picking Arman to win, 13% picking Dan Hooker. And as a added bonus, which I've started doing recently on these, we're going to use some AI. Fight Signal has Arman winning 60% of the time, 39.97 for Dan Hooker. And then another AI program I'm using now too, Agent MMA, has Arman Tsarukyan winning 70% of the time. So this, I might end up doing an AI video for this one, going more in depth on how they came to this conclusion. But yeah, again, AI, betting odds, public, they're all on Arman's side. Whose side am I on? I won't leave you in any more suspense. I am also going to be going with Arman Tsarukyan, but I think this fight's going to be closer than people think. So a couple things. First and foremost, I know if you look at Arman's career, typically he does win a little bit more by knockout. 41% of his wins are by knockout, 9 total. He's got 8 decisions. But if you look at Dan Hooker, hasn't really been knocked out at lightweight recently. You have to go all the way back to the Michael Chandler fight in 2021. I would argue Chandler's got more power than Arman, so I don't think there's going to be much of a knockout threat. Now, it is 5 rounds. Maybe that knockout does come, but I think decision's a little bit more likely. Also add in the fact that Arman Tsarukyan has gone the distance in 3 of his last 5 fights. Dan Hooker has gone the distance in 6 of his last 10 fights. So these are 2 guys. They're very high level. They do go the distance a lot. The other thing I'd argue is that Arman, granted it was a 3-round fight, not a 5-round fight. Arman wasn't able to finish Charles Oliveira. We've seen Oliveira get finished a little bit here and there. Again, maybe that leads to Arman not being as much of a finisher too. It was a 3rd-round finish against Joaquim Silva. He gets the 1st-round finish against Dariush, but Dariush we've seen has been finished a bunch of times. But look at this, like Ismagulov, he couldn't finish. Gamrot, he couldn't finish. So that's kind of why I'm leading a little bit more decision. The other thing we look at with Hooker, a lot older. There's a big age gap here. He's also taken a ton of damage. You look at that 52%, 51% striking defense. That will play a role in this one. And then the other thing I'd argue too with Dan Hooker is while he is on a nice win streak, his last 2 wins especially were split decisions. I mentioned the media scorecards on that one. He's kind of just eking by these fights, right? And I think if he would have finished these fights, maybe we feel a little bit better. And not to mention the big layoff for Hooker going into this as well. As much as it's going to affect Arman, Hooker's equally got a big layoff. And Hooker's been out due to injury. Arman's been out due to just the whole contract. Well, not contract, but he's had that issue with the UFC trying to get his next fight. We've heard rumblings about him turning down fights. I don't know the full story, but either way, Arman's been out longer than Dan Hooker has been. So just something to sort of consider when you're looking at that. But again, my official pick for this fight, don't think it's a huge surprise to a lot of people, is going to be Arman Tsarukyan via decision. So let me know in the comments which way you're leaning on this one, who you're picking. I want to get a prediction, not just a pick. Would love to hear how you are picking this one for this main event on Qatar. Would love to hear from you. Follow me on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, @Lynch on Sports. My name is James Lynch. This is Early Look. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.